You're standing outside at dusk when the color of the sky stops making sense. It isn't sunset, it's the middle of the afternoon, and the light has gone the color of a dirty coin. Ash is falling like slow snow. It's been falling for days. Somewhere, thousands of miles from where you stand, a mountain didn't just erupt, it detonated, and the sky itself has not recovered. You don't know any of that. You just know the sun hasn't been warm in weeks, the plants are dying faster than anyone can replant them, and every single person you've ever met is about to find out exactly how much of a species can disappear before it's actually officially gone. For 30 years, scientists told this story as fact. Now, some of the same researchers are saying it might be wrong, and the real answer is stranger than the disaster movie version ever was. So which is it? Did one volcano almost end the entire human race, or did we just really want it to have? Start with what actually happened, because the eruption itself isn't in dispute. About 74,000 years ago, a volcano now called Toba on the island of Sumatra produced one of the largest eruptions the planet has seen in millions of years. It threw out roughly 1,700 cubic miles of rock and ash, a volume you could use to bury almost 3 million Empire State Buildings. What's left behind is a crater lake large enough to be visible from space, sitting where a mountain used to be. Ash fell across India and Indonesia, thick enough to measure in inches, not specks, and traces of it have turned up as far away as East Africa, on the far side of an entire ocean. Sulfur and dust punched into the upper atmosphere and stayed there, blocking enough sunlight that global temperatures dropped somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees Celsius, and some models suggest the cooling in parts of the world lasted the better part of 6 years. That part happened. Nobody argues about the rock, the ash, or the cold that followed it. Here's where it gets interesting. In 1998, an anthropologist named Stanley Ambrose noticed something that seemed to fit together too perfectly to be coincidence. Around that same window of time, genetic evidence shows that the entire human population outside Africa appears to have collapsed, possibly down to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 people worldwide, not per continent, worldwide. Ambrose connected the dots, a global volcanic winter arriving at almost exactly the same moment our species nearly blinked out of existence. The theory had a name within a few years, the Toba catastrophe, and for a long time it was treated less like a theory and more like the reason you and I are such a genetically uniform species compared to almost everything else on the planet. And that genetic uniformity is not a small detail, it's honestly the wildest part of this whole story. Go find 2 chimpanzees living on opposite banks of the exact same river in equatorial Africa, close enough that you could shout across the water, and their DNA will show more differences between them than you'll find between a random human being born in Norway and a random human being born in New Guinea, 2 people on opposite sides of the planet who will never meet and share almost none of the same ancestry within recorded history. Every human alive today, all 8 billion of us, carries less genetic variation combined than the chimpanzees living in a single forest carry among themselves. Compare us to gorillas or orangutans, and the gap gets even wider. Something at some point squeezed our entire species down to almost nothing, hard enough that the scar is still readable in every cell of your body. So naturally, everybody wanted to know what did it, and Toba was sitting right there, dated to almost exactly the right moment, looking exactly like the villain of the story. But here's the objection that should have been asked earlier and eventually was. If a supervolcano's winter had actually starved most of humanity to death, the archaeological record should show it. It doesn't. Sites in South Africa, dated to right through and after the eruption, show people not just surviving, but working, making tools, collecting shellfish, carrying on with life like nothing had happened. Similar sites turn up in India and Indonesia, sitting under a literal layer of Toba's own volcanic ash, with stone tools both above and below it, made in the same style, meaning the people making them never actually stopped what they were doing long enough to notice the sky had changed. If a genuine extinction-level winter had swept through, you would expect a gap in that record, a stretch of silence where the tools disappear. There isn't one. Then, in 2021, a team modeling the climate effects in far more detail found something that undercuts the whole premise even further. The cooling wasn't global in any even sense. The northern hemisphere took a real hit, but much of the southern hemisphere, including most of Africa, where the majority of humans actually lived at the time, saw little to no cooling at all. One prominent geneticist who has spent years studying this exact period put it more bluntly than most academic journals would allow, writing flatly that the so-called Toba bottleneck simply didn't happen the way the popular version of the story claims, which leaves us with a genuinely strange position. The population crash in our genes still looks real. Something did squeeze humanity down to a number small enough that a bad flu season could have finished the job. We just no longer have a confident answer for what that something was. It might have been Toba after all, just less catastrophically than first thought. It might have been a slower grind of smaller climate shifts, disease, or the simple statistical fragility of being a tiny founding population that walked out of Africa into an unforgiving world. Scientists are comfortable admitting they don't fully know, which is a much less satisfying answer than a volcano almost got us, but it happens to be the honest one. And maybe that's actually the more unsettling version, not the less interesting one. A single, dramatic supervolcano is at least a story with a villain, a clean beginning and end, a disaster you can point to and say, that's what almost got us, and it's over now. What the evidence increasingly suggests instead is that our entire species spent tens of thousands of years walking a genetic tightrope for reasons nobody has fully identified, through hazards ordinary enough that they didn't even leave clear fingerprints in the rock or the ash, and came out the other side anyway. No single monster to blame, no single eruption to point at, just an extremely narrow population in an extremely hostile world that somehow kept going long enough to become every person who has ever lived since, without anyone alive today being able to say for certain what the closest call actually was. You are, right now, reading this because that thread never snapped. Not because a volcano spared us. Not because of any single dramatic rescue anyone can point to on a map. Because some group of a few thousand people, for reasons science still can't fully name, kept having children who kept having children, generation after generation, through however many near misses history simply never wrote down, until the number stopped being fragile and started being unstoppable. Every war, every plague, every empire, every person you've ever loved, all of it happened downstream of a bottleneck so narrow that a bad decade could have ended the entire experiment before it produced a single one of us. The scariest version of this story, the one with the volcano as the villain, turned out to be probably wrong. The true version, the one where we don't even know for certain what almost ended us, is the one that should actually keep you up at night.